In a far galaxy where stars shine brighter than fire and moons float like soft feathers, there was a planet with high mountains, glowing rivers, and silver skies. The people of this planet were called the Valeri. They were tall with smooth skin that looked like stone and eyes that glowed like fireflies. They lived in great cities that floated above clouds and moved through the sky. Like ships on a quiet sea, they believed in strength, power, and beauty. They did not care for weakness. They did not show kindness to the different or the broken. In the center of this proud world stood a large, shining palace, made of crystal and light. It had 1,000 rooms and long halls that echoed with music, and steps of proud warriors and royal voices. But deep in the quietest part of this palace, behind tall cold doors and empty halls, lived a little girl with soft white skin and hair like silver smoke. Her name was Lyra, and she was a princess, but she was not like the others. Lyra could not see the stars or the faces around her. Her eyes were clouded like frozen water, and no light ever reached her mind. Her legs were weak, and her hands shook like leaves in wind. She could not run or fight or dance like the other children of the palace. She was born this way, and the Valeri were afraid of her. They said she was broken, cursed, unfit to be one of them, so they left her alone. Her room was round and soft, with walls that hummed a soft tune like a sleeping bird, and a bed that floated a little above the floor. It was quiet there, too quiet. There were no toys, no books, no voices, just silence and the sound of her breath. The only visitor she had was an old helper droid, who brought her food and cleaned her room. It did not speak, only beeped once before leaving every day. Lyra waited for someone to come, but no one ever came. She would sit for hours listening to the air, hoping to hear laughter or footsteps or songs from the halls above. Sometimes she whispered stories to herself, little tales she made from sounds and dreams. She had never seen a tree, but she believed they were tall and soft like the pillows on her bed. She had never seen the sun, but she thought it felt like warm honey on her face. She had never seen her own reflection and sometimes wondered what her face looked like, if it looked like her mother's or her father's or someone from the star. She remembered their voices only as soft shapes in her mind. Her mother had once sung to her a quiet song in a language that felt like wind on water. Her father had once placed a small crystal in her hand and said, "This is for your heart." She still held that crystal under her pillow and listened to it when the nights were too long and the silence too heavy. The Valeri forgot her name. They never said it. They only called her the blind one, or the weak one, or the girl who should not be. They said she was not a true Valeri, that she was a mistake. But Lyra never cried, not because she was strong, but because she did not know how. She had no one to teach her sadness or joy. Only the empty space around her was her friend still. Her mind was sharp like the edge of a blade. She remembered every sound, every whisper, every shift in air. She could tell when a storm was near by the taste of the wind. She knew when someone was outside her door by the beat of their steps. She could feel when a starship flew over the palace by the change in the floors. She listened, she learned, she waited. She sang soft songs with no words, just long notes that floated through her room like birds made of voice. The droid never responded, but she kept singing, maybe hoping someone out there in the halls, in the sky, or in the stars would hear her one day. Maybe someone would answer. The palace grew louder each year, with war drums and loud voices speaking of battles and enemies and fear. But Lyra stayed in her silent world, untouched and unseen, forgotten like a book with no name. Sometimes she thought she would fade away into nothing, a shadow of a girl who once waited for light, but deep inside her heart there was a quiet fire, a small spark, like the glow of a faraway star. It was not bright, but it was steady. It whispered, not yet, not the end, not forever. And so she waited. She listened, she dreamed, and far away in a different world, spinning blue and green under a yellow sun, a young human named David was getting ready for his first mission to the stars. He did not know about the lonely girl with silver hair in the palace of clouds. He did not know her name, or her song, or her silence. But soon he would, very soon. Many years passed since the stars first began to whisper of war. A strange force had entered the edge of Valeri space, a shadow fleet, with ships darker than night and weapons older than memory. They called themselves the Krell, and they came not for trade, not for talk, not for peace. They came to take. They moved from world to world, turning oceans into fire and cities into dust. And though the Valeri were proud and strong, even they could not stand forever. Against the storm the High Council gathered in the Skychamber, with cold faces and quiet fear. Their fleets were breaking, their machines were failing, and their people were losing hope. They needed help, but asking for help was not in the Valeri way. They believed in standing alone, in never bowing, in never bending. But now their pride was a chain around their necks, and their world was falling. So they did the unthinkable. They called Earth. Earth was far and strange, with people who wore smiles, even in war, and spoke in many voices all at once. Humans were smaller than the Valeri. but full of wonder and full of heart. They had machines that could heal cities and minds, that solved puzzles in sleep. They were not warriors like the Valeri, but they were builders, thinkers, dreamers, and sometimes that was what the stars needed. The council sent a message to Earth, asking not for warriors, but for helpers and thinkers, for someone who could understand ancient Valeri systems and awaken old machines hidden under crystal and stone. Someone quiet, someone kind, someone with sharp eyes and gentle hands. That someone was David. David was an engineer from a floating city above the Atlantic Ocean. He had never fired a weapon or ridden a ship into battle, but he had read every file on Valeri tech and knew how to fix things. Others had forgotten he was chosen not because he was strong, but because he listened, because he learned, and because sometimes the best way to fight was to repair, not destroy. He took a small ship across stars through silence and light, and touched down on Valeri soil under the watch of silver guards and proud leaders. They looked at him with doubt, but also with hope, and maybe even fear, not of him, but of what he might find. He was brought to the palace above the clouds, the heart of Valeri pride, where machines lived in walls, and the air hummed with quiet power. He walked its halls, with careful steps, reading codes on the walls, and hearing the hum of systems asleep for ages. He spoke little, and worked much, always watching, always listening, always thinking. The Valeri did not speak to him, unless needed. He was strange to them, soft and quiet, with eyes full of thought, and no need to prove anything. But he did not mind. He came to help, and nothing else mattered. One evening, while following a strange energy reading from an old panel, he entered a wing of the palace no one had used in years. The lights were dim, the walls cracked, the air still and dry, but beneath the silence, he heard something, not a sound exactly, more like a feeling, like a breath held too long, or a song with no voice. He followed it past broken doors and faded signs until he reached a round room with soft light and soft air, where someone sat. Alone it was Hera, girl with silver hair that floated like mist, and pale skin that seemed to glow from inside. She sat with her head down, hands resting on her lap, her eyes closed, or maybe not closed at all. Maybe they simply could not see. She was still like a statue made of light and shadow, and yet he knew she was alive, because the air around her moved like music, soft, slow, sad. He stepped forward, just one step, on the floor side under his foot. She did not move, but she spoke. Kiss someone there. Her voice was quiet, like the edge of a dream, not afraid, not demanding. Just curious. Yes, he said. I heard something. She tilted her head slightly and smiled. A little, not a big smile, not a happy one, but a smile that said, thank you for noticing me, thank you for answering her. You from the stars? She asked. He said, from Earth. Earth. She whispered, like the word was a gift, like it tasted new and bright in her mouth. He walked closer and sat on the edge of the floating bed, his tools still on his belt, his mind full of questions. But for now, he asked only one. What is your name? She paused, as if searching for it in the air. Lyra, she said, just Lyra. And that was how it began, not with fire, not with war, not with glory, but with one voice reaching out into silence and another voice answering back. The air in the quiet room felt thick, like old dreams and forgotten memories. Soft lights floated in the ceiling like stars lost in clouds, and the floor below shimmered with a faint silver glow. The girl named Lyra sat still as stone, with her white hands resting gently on her lap, and her silver hair falling around her shoulders like the wings of a sleeping bird. David sat on the edge of the floating bed, unsure of what to say, unsure of what to feel, unsure if he had entered a place he was not meant to find. But something deep inside told him this meeting was not a mistake, that the girl before him was not someone to ignore or forget. Lyra tilted her head slightly, listening not with her eyes but with something deeper, something older than sight. Her ears caught every sound, her skin felt every shift in the air. She was blind, but she saw more than anyone else ever had in that lonely palace. You are quiet, she said after a long moment, her voice soft and even like a warm breeze at the edge of a dream. I am thinking, David replied, not knowing what else to say. Thinking about me? She asked, not as a challenge but as a question full of wonder. Yes, he answered, you are not what I expected. She smiled a little, her first real smile since childhood, the kind of smile that rises not from joy but from surprise, the surprise that someone had stayed, that someone was still there. Heard your footsteps, she said. They were not like the others, they were light, careful, kind. David looked at her silver eyes. They did not move, they did not blink, but he could feel them, feel her seeing him, in ways no one ever had. How long have you been here? He asked. I do not know, she said. I do not count days, only voices, and yours is new. David nodded slowly, though she could not see it then. He remembered and said, I am David. I came from Earth to help with the machines. She whispered the word slowly, like it was a puzzle, like it held meaning he could not yet understand. He reached into his tool pack and pulled out a small scanner. It lit up with a soft green glow, and beeped once. Lyra flinched a little, not from fear, but from surprise. That sound is new, she said. I like it. Smiled, and said it helps me find things like broken wires or hidden energy. Like secrets in the wall's eye. Like secrets, she said. They are like shadows with stories. David looked around the room. It was simple and soft, with no sharp edges. No bright colors, only gentle curves and quiet air. He saw a small silver crystal on the bed beside her pillow, and pointed to it. What is that? My star, she said. My father gave it to me. He said it was for my heart. David touched the crystal. It was warm and hummed with a soft rhythm, like a slow heartbeat. He handed it back to her, and she held it close to her chest. You have a kind voice, she said, like a river without rocks. David chuckled, and said, that is the first time anyone has said that to Mesh. Turned her head slightly toward the sound of his laughter, and said, I like it when you laugh. It feels like light. He looked at her again, really looked, and saw not a broken girl, not a cursed child, but someone more, someone hidden. Someone waiting. Why are you here? He asked gently. Why did they leave you alone? Because I am different, she said. Because I was born with quiet eyes and soft bones, and they fear what they do not understand. David felt a tightness in his chest. Not of anger, not of pity, but of something deeper, something like respect. Do you want to leave this room? He asked. Do you want to see the stars? I dream of stars, she said, but dreams do not open doors. Maybe this time they will, he said. Maybe I can help you. She turned toward him again, and whispered, would you stay a little longer? Yes, he said. I will stay as long as you needn't. So he stayed. They sat in silence for a while, not the empty silence of before, but a new silence. Full of meaning, full of presence, full of something that had never been there before. In that moment, something old began to break, and something new began to grow. It was not a bond made by rules or duty, but by something simple, something human. In the shadows of the quiet room, a seed of trust was planted, a seed that would grow into something strong, something bright, something no one could take away. Lyra did not know what the future held, but for the first time in her life, she felt seen, she felt heard, she felt real. And David, who had come to fix machines, found something even more important. Days passed like soft waves in a quiet sea, and David kept returning to the silent wing of the palace, where Lyra lived alone in her round silver room, her voice like wind, her smile like moonlight. Each time he came, she greeted him not with surprise, but with peace, as if she had always known. He would return as if his voice was a thread pulling her closer to something she could not name. He brought her stories from Earth. Stories of blue oceans and tall trees and animals with wings and legs and colors that danced in the sun. He told her about music made with strings and machines that flew higher than birds. He told her about people who ran fast, and people who painted, and people who helped others just because it felt right. She listened without blinking, holding every word like a treasure in her hands. She asked many questions, but never the wrong ones, always curious, always gentle. Her world had been made of silence, but now it was blooming with sound, and she let it grow without fear. David fixed old panels and dark wires around the palace during the day, and visited Lyra during the quiet hours between light and night. The guards did not stop him. They saw him as harmless, just a human with tools and quiet steps. But not all eyes were blind. Some noticed his visits, and began to whisper, why does the human speak with the forgotten one? They said, why waste time with the cursed girl? She is broken, she is nothing. David heard them. He heard every cruel word behind, every smile and every careful voice that warned him to stay away, but he did not care. He had seen more strength in Lyra's quiet than in their loud pride. He had seen more beauty in her words than in their shining holes. One evening, while Lyra hummed a soft melody, and David worked on a damaged wall near her room, his scanner picked up something strange, a low-energy reading coming from behind the wall, behind layers of stone and crystal. He pressed his hand to the surface, and felt a pulse, a hidden heartbeat. What is that? Lyra asked, her head tilting toward him. Something old, he said, something hidden. He worked carefully, removing a panel, and behind it found a chamber small and dark with wires like roots, and a machine shaped like a circle, with symbols he did not know but patterns he could read. It was a neural interface, ancient Valeri tech, meant to connect minds and senses, a way to see without eyes, to move without limbs, to think beyond limits. Lyra moved closer, her steps small and unsure, but drawn by something deeper than sight. It feels familiar, she said, her fingers hovering in the air, like they were remembering something. David looked at her, and asked, do you think it was made for you? She nodded slowly. I do not know why, but yes, I feel it, I hear it like a voice calling home. They sat by the machine for a long time, not speaking, just breathing, just thinking. David scanned the system. It was damaged, but not lost, old, but not dead. It needed power, it needed repair, it needed trust. If we fix it, he said, it might link with your mind. It might let you feel the world. It might let you. Li Chi turned to him, her voice steady, but soft. Would you help me always? He said without pause. So they began every evening. David worked on the machine, while Lyra sat beside him, learning every sound, every word, every wire. He explained each step in simple ways, and she remembered everything. Her mind was like water holding all he gave. Without spilling, the Valeri grew restless. Some asked where the human disappeared each night. Some followed him with silent steps, but never dared to enter Lyra's wing. They feared her, still feared the quiet, feared the unknown. One day a tall council guard stopped David near the lift and said, "You should stay away from that one. She is not part of our future." David looked at him and said firmly, "Maybe she is your only future." The guard did not answer, just turned away with eyes like stone. David returned to Lyra and told her everything, and she smiled, not with joy, but with knowing. "They fear what they do not hear," she said. "They do not know my voice then." "Let them hear it," he said. "Let them see." Machine was almost ready, its hum stronger, its light warmer. David could feel its power rising like dawn. Behind clouds, Lyra placed her hand on its surface, and it pulsed like it knew her, like it had waited just as long as she had that night. As the stars moved across the sky, and the palace lights dimmed to sleep, David and Lyra sat side by side near the old machine, not speaking, not needing to speak. The bond between them was not built with rules or names or blood. It was built with trust and time and truth, and it was only the beginning. The night was quiet, but the room was alive. The old machine, hidden for years, now glowed with soft light, like a sleeping star, ready to wake its rings. Turned slow and silent, its energy rising like water behind a dam, waiting to be released, waiting for a voice, waiting for her. Lyra sat beside it, her hands resting on the edge, her breath calm, her face still, her silver hair falling like soft light across her shoulders. Her eyes saw nothing, but her mind felt everything, the warmth, the rhythm, the memory in the wires. She knew it was made for her, not by chance, not by mistake, but for a reason she could not yet name. David watched her from the other side of the machine, his tools resting on the floor, his fingers brushing over the control panel. Again and again he had repaired dozens of systems since arriving, but none like this, none that seemed to listen, none that seemed to remember, none that seemed alive. He had spent hours inside the old codes, reading symbols that twisted and shifted like water, but there was one thing he could not understand, one line that repeated across every panel, across every wall, across every piece of memory. "Only mind with light may enter." He had asked Lyra what it meant, and she had simply said, "I think it is about trust." That night, they decided to activate the link, not because the palace gave permission, not because the council asked, but because they believed in each other, because the stars outside were changing, and the time for waiting was over. David placed the final crystal into the center ring, and the room filled with a soft vibration, like a distant song, like a call across space. He turned to Lyra and asked once more, "Are you ready?" She nodded once, and reached forward, her fingers touching the center ring, her skin meeting the light, and in that moment everything changed. The machine opened like a flower, slow and bright and beautiful, and wires reached out, not to trap her, but to welcome her. Soft threads of light wrapping around her hands, her arms, her head. They did not hurt, they did not burn, they simply connected, they simply spoke. David watched as Lyra's body stilled, her breath slow, her face calm, but her eyes wide, not with fear, but with wonder. He stepped closer and spoke her name. "Lyra, can you hear?" Mesh did not speak, not with her voice, but with her mind, and David heard her as if she were beside him, as if she were inside him, as if their thoughts were sharing the same sky. "I can see," she said, her voice like wind, like stars, like something new. "I can see, not with eyes, but with light, with sound, with feeling. I can feel the room. I can feel you. I can feel the palace." David's heart raced. He checked her readings. They were strong. Her energy balanced, her mind in sync with the system. She was not lost. She was not broken. She was more alive than ever before. She began to move slowly, her hands rising, her fingers brushing the air, and the lights in the room moved with her. The walls pulsed, the floor shifted, the doors opened and closed like breath, and David realized she was not just linked, she was in control outside. The room alarms began to hum, soft red lights flashed across the halls. The system had awoken, and the palace had noticed. Guards moved through the corridors, their steps fast, their faces hard. Voices rang in the halls. "The machine is active, the Forgotten One is connected. Stop them before it is too late." But it was already too late. Lyra stood now, her legs once weak, now steady, supported by the system, her posture tall, her hair glowing with the same light as the machine. Her voice rang through the walls, not in fear, but in strength. "I am not your shame," she said. "I am not your secret. I am not your silence." Her voice reached the council chamber, reached the guards, reached every room of the floating palace, like the voice of the wind, like the cry of the stars. It could not be stopped. David stood beside her, not as a master, not as a guide, but as a friend, as the one who stayed when all others walked away, as the one who listened when no one else could hear. The system opened more now, not just for her, but for the world. It showed the old maps, the hidden codes, the lost defenses of the Valeri. It gave back what was taken long ago, because it had found the one it waited for, and that one was Heron. The days that followed the palace changed not because they chose it, but because she made it impossible to stay blind. She walked its halls with light in her steps, and power in her voice. And beside her always was the quiet human, with steady hands and honest eyes. The machine was no longer a secret, and neither was she. She was their gift and their chance, and their truth. And the stars watched in silence. The sky above the palace was no longer quiet. Dark clouds of war moved across the stars, and ships without names passed like shadows over moons. The Krell were near, closer than ever. Their weapons sharp, their hearts cold. They had no fear, no pause, no kindness, only hunger and fire. And the were not ready. Their fleets were old, their codes forgotten, their systems broken. They had pride, but pride was not enough. Not now, not against an enemy that came, not for land or power, but for silence. They wanted the stars to go dark, and the were standing in their way inside the great palace. The council argued, their words sharp, their voices loud, each one trying to speak louder than the next, but none had answers. None had a plan, only fear, only shame, only noise, till a new voice filled the chamber. I have seen the paths you lost, I have felt the systems you forgot, I have heard the machines you've silenced, and they remember me. The council turned as one, and saw her standing in the doorway, tall and bright, her silver hair flowing like fire, her white eyes glowing with light, her body no longer weak, her hands no longer still. Beside her walked the human David, his face calm, his steps quiet, his eyes clear. The guards reached for weapons, but the lights dimmed, the walls moved, the doors locked, and the room itself whispered her name, not as a warning, but as a welcome. She stepped forward, and the floor lit with each step, as if the palace itself bowed before her. The council fell silent, not out of respect, but out of shock, out of fear, out of something they had never known. You called me broken, she said, but I was only waiting. You called me cursed, but I was only hidden. You left me alone, and still I rose. One council elder spoke, her voice shaking. You are not of the path you were never chosen. You cannot lead. Lyra raised her hand, and a map appeared in the air. Lines of light, paths of power, doors long sealed, now opening before them. The old network, the old defense, the old codes, all alive again. Through Harry was not chosen by you, she said. I was chosen by the system, by the stars, by the silence. David stepped forward and added, she can see what you cannot, she can hear what you ignore, she can fight in ways no one else can. The council had no reply. They looked at the glowing maps, the awakening systems, the rising strength in the walls, and knew the truth. Their pride had blinded them, and now only she could guide them. Soon the whole palace began to change under her touch. Machines that had slept for centuries now hummed with life. Ships once rusted now floated like feathers in space. Weapons made for defense now pointed toward the stars with purpose, not rage. The Valeri people watched from towers and windows and clouds. They saw her walking with David beside her, talking to engineers, speaking to young minds, teaching them not just how to use the old ways, but how to feel them, how to listen, how to think like light, not like stone. Many did not understand, but they followed, not because they were forced, but because they saw something they had never seen in their leaders before. Hope. She spoke not like a queen, but like a guide, not with commands, but with questions, not from pride, but from purpose. And when the Krell finally came with ships like blades and fire in their eyes, the Valeri did not fall back. They stood strong. Their ships moved with new speed, their systems lit with new power. Their people stood together, not behind walls, but beside each other. At the center of it all was Lyra, her mind linked to every ship, every shield, every voice, her thoughts flowing through wires, her heart beating with the rhythm of the fleet. David was always near, watching the systems, holding the codes, speaking when needed, and silent when not. He had not come to lead, but he had helped a leader rise. The first strike came fast, a wave of heat and light. The Krell expected panic, but they met calm, they met order, they met a force that knew itself and knew its purpose. The battle lasted for hours, across stars and silence and sound, but in the end, the Krell turned away. Not because they feared death, but because they saw something they did not understand: unity. When it was over, the palace was quiet again, but not with fear. With peace. The council stood before Lyra and lowered their heads, not with shame, but with respect. You have done what we could not, they said. You have become more than we ever dreamed. She did not answer with words. She only turned to David and smiled, and in that smile was every answer they needed. The Girl once forgotten was now remembered, not as broken, not as cursed, but as the one who rose. The stars above the Valeri world were clear again, shining like small fires in a dark sea. Each one steady, each one bright. The sky no longer held the threat of the Krell, no longer carried the shadow of fear. Now it sang with peace, a quiet song that stretched across the galaxy, soft and deep, and full of promise. The palace that once floated in silence now breathed with life. Its halls filled with voices and footsteps and laughter, its walls glowing with light, not cold or sharp, but warm and calm. Like the early morning sun, the machines once forgotten now moved with rhythm and grace. The rooms once locked now opened to Ulat. The heart of it all stood Lyra, her silver hair brushed by wind, her white eyes opened wide, not to see with sight, but to fill with presence, to sense the air and the sky, and every voice around her. She walked not as a ruler above the people, but as a soul among them. She was not distant, not hidden, she was present, she was known. She visited the young, the old, the curious, and the quiet. She listened more than she spoke, and when she spoke her words felt like songs, like stories carried by the stars. She taught the children how to hear the hum of the systems, how to trust their minds, how to honor stillness, as well as sound. Beside her always was David, his steps soft, his smile steady, his hands busy with new tools, new machines, new ideas. He spoke to the builders and the thinkers and the dreamers. He showed them what it meant to work, not for power, but for purpose. Not for glory, but for growth. He was not given a title, not made a leader, not placed on any throne, but none questioned his place by her side. He was the one who stayed, the one who listened, the one who believed before anyone else did, and that was more than any crown. The council no longer ruled alone. They now served as guides, not as masters. They asked before they ordered. They listened before they judged, and when they spoke with care, not with fear. One morning, as light spilled across the towers and soft bells rang in the wind, Lyra stood on the highest balcony of the palace, her hands resting on the rail, her breath slow, her heart full around her. The city moved with peace and purpose, and hope. David stepped beside her, his eyes on the horizon, and said softly, "Do you think they will remember what it was like before?" Lyra turned her head slightly, and said, "They must not forget, but they must not live in the past. They must walk forward, with both memory and light." He nodded, and placed a small device on the railing. It was a message beacon, one that would carry a signal far across the stars. Not for help, not for warning, but for invitation. "What will it say?" he asked. Hershey paused for a moment, then said, "Tell them we have changed. Tell them we are ready. Tell them they are not alone." The beacon lit up and a soft pulse rose into the sky, a message carried by light and sound, a signal that would reach Earth and beyond, not to call for war, but to call for friendship, for connection, for something new. In the days that followed, new ships arrived, not with weapons, but with gifts, not with flags, but with hands open and empty. Ready to build, ready to learn, ready to share, and the Valeri welcomed them, not with pride, but with peace, not as rulers, but as neighbors. And Lyra stood at the center of it all, still learning, still listening, still guiding. With her heart she visited the quiet room where she had once lived, now filled with soft lights and open doors. Children now played there, laughing, singing, asking questions. She sat with them sometimes, telling stories about stars, about songs, about machines, and about silence. She never told them to be strong, she told them to be kind. She never told them to be perfect, she told them to be present, to be curious, to be open. And they listened one evening, as the sky turned violet, and the stars blinked in soft rhythm. David and Lyra sat near the same machine that had once changed everything. It now rested silent, no longer glowing, no longer needed as before, but never forgotten. He looked at her and said, "Do you miss the silence?" She smiled, and said, "No, the silence taught me, but the voices healed me." They sat in peace, no need for more words, just breath, just being, just the soft sound of a world that had found its rhythm again in time. The story of the blind girl who rose became more than legend. It became a lesson, not about strength, not about power, but about trust, about connection, about what happens when one person chooses to care, when one person chooses to stay. And across the stars, her name was spoken, not with sorrow, not with pity, but with light. Lyra, the one who listened, the one who rose, the one who changed everything.